When I first sat down to do a meditation, I couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. I now spend up to 2 hours every single morning. I give myself 2 hours. So I'm up at sometimes 4 o'clock. Most mornings I'm up at 5 or 6. I give myself 2 hours, which is my time, until I don't always spend 2 hours, but I give myself 2 hours until I get that sweet spot where I can feel my body and my mind separating, where my body goes to sleep, but I'm still consciously aware of my, I'm aware of my consciousness. Does that make sense?
100%, 100%. And what methodology do you use? Is there a specific type of meditation you do, transcendental or?
I was hoping you was going to ask that question. So, unbeknownst to me, so where I first started was with guided meditations, because I really had no idea where to start. And I thought, just listening to music, I'm being a complete rookie, I was like, this isn't doing anything for me. So I'd listen to guided meditations, and I always found that a female voice seemed to be much more calming and soothing for me. With the guided meditation, that allowed me to keep my center of focus on the voice. Once I'd gotten to a point where I felt like the guided meditations had served their purpose, I then moved on to, I started to learn about breathwork. I started to work on, which I know is, I can't think of the damn expression, mindfulness meditation. Yes. So I was using diaphragmic breathing, very much like you would understand when Arnold Schwarzenegger and Frank Zane would do the vacuum pose.
Vacuum, yeah.
Trying to suck the belly button so it touches your spine.
Yes.
And learning about the Wim Hof method as well, to create like a hypoxic environment. So then you'd start to get tingling. And once I was creating that hypoxic environment within my body, that was creating physiological changes. And as I was getting this like bubbling sensation and the tingling, and the back of my neck was, it felt like doing drugs, but without doing drugs. And I think that's possibly something to do with, and I don't know how much there is to this, but possibly my brain secreting some DMT. Maybe, and I'm getting this euphoric, natural high from breathing it in a certain way. And as I did that, that's when I found that loads of my really, really troubling emotions started to bubble to the surface. And the things that I felt like I couldn't release, or I felt were stuck. I don't know much about chakras, but it was, I could physically feel parts of my body like balls or lumps or something actually physically moving through me and then being released as I was crying and as I was breathing it out. Not unlike the John Coffey from the Green Mile, where he takes in the illness with the white light, and then when he expels it, it's like these little black flies. So mindfulness meditation was one. Then I have also done like the loving meditation. I think is it a metta meditation?
I'm not sure. I've never done it myself.
So the metta meditation is about concentrating on yourself and sending loving information to yourself. That can be done with either affirmations, or as I personally call them, vocalization vibration. So anytime that we talk, as I learnt with NLP as well, how we actually speak has power within the words. When they say there's, when there's a word that's a spelling, you're effectively casting a spell. Yes. But there's actually 5 different ways of saying no. So when somebody says no, or no, or no, it's the subtext of what somebody's saying. And also I learned about where you place sorry in a sentence also completely changes the context of where the power sits and the boundary sits within how you explain. So if I say, sorry, I can't do that, I've just said sorry before I've even explained what I'm going to describe. If I say, I can't do that, sorry, I'm now creating a boundary for myself, but I'm also honoring myself as well.
Yes.
So by saying, sorry, I can't do that, I'm giving my power away to that person I'm speaking to unconsciously, because that's how I'm communicating to my unconscious mind and body.
100%. And that's kind of, well, that's the whole thing about meditation that we discussed before on your podcast, where it's kind of like when you're finally making that connect between the mind and the body. And it's kind of weird because you're like, whoa, where are these traumas kind of coming from? That's where I told you I was reading that book about the tapping solution, where it's the same deal. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, you know what, releasing trauma that kind of gets stored in the body. It's almost like our body is a computer, right? And it's kind of mind blowing the way that you said that, because I mean, I've never experienced that from meditation myself. Like, I'm not at that level yet. I'm still kind of dabbling, but with the tapping, I did kind of feel that, you know, the more times that you do it, the more you kind of feel alleviated almost. And it's almost like you're releasing those bad vibes, that bad energy. And it's funny that you mentioned that as far as like your vibration goes. So one thing I was going to ask you, in contrast to like when you were, let's say, drinking to how you are now, what is the biggest physical difference that you felt now that you've kind of just finally let go of all that? And how do you feel mentally?
Night and day. It literally is like the alcohol. The only way I can describe it is because my thinking, my feeling, and my acting has changed. That creates my personality, and my personality creates my personal reality. So, because the alcohol was attached to the old personality here, as I started to think, feel, and act differently, so did my belief system in myself, my confidence, my self-esteem, everything about how I think, used to think about myself, how I used to feel about myself, then started to change how I acted. If I change how I act, then that changes my habits, because they become repetitive procedures in our lives. And then our habits create our destiny. So as my how I thought and how I acted and how I felt about myself started to change, and my belief in my system and belief in myself started to change, then all of the alcoholism and the tendencies began to slip away. And as that started to slip away, and a new personality started to form, then I found myself creating a new identity, hence the Meditating Viking, to match and fit the new personality.
Yeah. That makes, yeah, I mean, it's
So
almost like a rebirth, right?
Yeah, I reinvented myself. And the crazy thing was it wasn't really, I wasn't really aware of it happening until about a year ago, where it just suddenly went, where I started to, in lockdown in the UK, couldn't get to the barbers. So like I say, I used to have this like high and tight, either like a flat top or like John Cena, and people used to, like, young kids think they look like John Cena because of the haircut, like a high and tight, like a military cut. And because I was growing my hair and I didn't know what to do with it, so I just thought, yeah, you know, I'll leave this bit here. And then I got my wife to shave the sides, and I started to grow the beard, and it just sort of evolved. And I was like, well, hold on a minute, I'm starting to look like a Viking.
Like a
And what do I
Viking.
spend my life talking about and teaching now, and sharing with as many people to try and get them on board? Because, you know, 3 years ago, if you'd have said you'd been meditating for 2 hours every morning, I would have fucking laughed in your face. Serious.
Yeah, that's awesome though. But it's kind of like, it's funny in reinventing yourself. It's almost, that's where you find yourself, right? Because I'm also reading a book called the Gift of Giving. And it was interesting. One of the things that he said is like, you got to find or you lose yourself in giving of yourself. And that's almost like, well, where does this identity, like, where did I create this identity? Was I born with it? Or is this just the ego talking? And it's almost like when you merge yourself to the essential self is where you truly start to discover more about said self. And it's like, well, I'm not really this name that they gave me. I'm not really this personality they told me about. I can change a lot of things about myself, right? And it's funny because you mentioned that, and now you're at a state where it's like, nah, this is more in congruence with who I believe I truly am, right? How does that make you feel now versus how you were before?
I really don't recognize the person I was before. And I'm getting chills, because underneath it all, I knew that there was this person that was waiting to break out and break free. I knew that this version of me was always there, like almost like tucked away in the shadows or locked up in a dark box. in the back of my mind, in the back of my heart somewhere. And now I'm the person that I feel that I've always wanted to be, and that has always been there. I cannot just, like when people say that come to me and then they work with me, and I'm either, normally it starts with me PTing them, and then I drip feed little bits of NLP with a bit of life coaching in. And I find more out about them, because there's always an emotional pain which is attached to why they want to change the physical external of themselves through exercise, which was the same with me, which is a way of masking. So what I do is I get down and to understand what is the pain that's driving the emotion, that's driving the action, that's driving you to want to change yourself physically. Because when you actually get to a point of changing yourself physically, the emotions of why you don't feel the emotional need still isn't being met. And so it creates a distorted perception of yourself. Even though you look fantastic physically, internally, you still haven't you haven't implemented the changes, which is where the deepest hooks sit behind the emotional pain.
100%. What's the one thing that you think guys could start doing right now to kind of make that leap into really, I guess, getting through to their past traumas, or really developing or really, mending those wounds? What's the first thing they could do just to kind of get started, I guess, like a simple step that guys can do for their mental health?
I keep it real simple. Everybody that I coach and everybody that I teach, I say there's 3 keys. So the first key is acknowledging that there's something in your life that you're not happy with, or some aspect of yourself that you're not happy with. Once you can acknowledge it, then you can then start to work towards accepting that thing or element of yourself that you're not happy with. Once we get to accepting it, then we can move on to the final stage, which is by far the hardest. And I still have to work on this on a daily basis, because this is a perishable skill. Because otherwise my ego can still come in and go, no, you don't need to do that anymore, which is surrender. And one of the first things that I did, and I still use this tool now as an affirmation in my meditations, and I memorized it. Great divine universe, I now ask you for guidance, help, and strength. I hand over. So this is surrender. So I acknowledge that I need guidance, help, and strength, because I can't do this on my own. So for me, the higher power, there's the intelligence. Some people see it as the universe. Some people see it as God. Some people see it as Allah. Everybody's interpretation of a higher power is down to them. My interpretation is the universe. The universe, I believe, has intelligence itself.
Gotcha.
Because of when people say they have a miracle, I call it a synchronicity. So something happens that cannot be by chance. And you think, well, hold on a minute, how does that landed in my lap? How has that happened? Worked in my favor?
Yes.
So, and some people might say that's a miracle. So I now hand over my worries, troubles, and fears for transmutation. Yeah. I see it, I feel it, I believe it, and I say it as if it is already done. So be it, it is done.
Gotcha.
Great divine universe. So I'll repeat it again. So great divine universe, I now ask for guidance, help, and strength. I hand over my worries, troubles, and fears for transmutation. I see it, I feel it, I believe it. So be it, it is done.
Gotcha. And that's like a morning affirmation that you do every morning, or? Okay.
Anytime that I feel like I've woken up and I'm like, I've still got an emotional hangover from the day before, if that makes sense.
No, I got you. Yeah.
It doesn't happen all the time. I still react, but my refractory period of those emotions is dramatically shorter, as opposed to it being a whole day or a whole week or a whole month. What's wrong with him? I was in a mood. He's been like that all day. What's wrong with him? He's been like that for the last month. It must be like his temperament or something.
Yeah.
What's wrong with him? He's been like that for 3 years. It's like part of his personality. It becomes a personality trait.
5
so
years,
my refractory
10 years.
Period,
yeah.
Sorry? Yeah.
5 years, 10 years. Yeah, I know where you're going with that.
Yeah. So, what happened to him? His wife divorced him 10 years ago, but he's still having the same emotional reaction 10 years later.
Yeah. And it's the same personality. You're right, because it's kind of like we discussed on your podcast too, where that carryover just goes on for way too long. It's like, bro, you got to let it go eventually. And if you don't, well, it's just gonna eat you alive, right? So
Literally.
I 100% agree with you on that, man.